8 June 1945, Essen, British Zone. A clerk named Carl M., 32 years old and unmoored, writes in a thin school notebook with a cracked spine, Wir wussten genug und mochten das nicht wissen. We knew enough, and we liked not knowing. It is a sentence that could not have been spoken aloud on that street at that hour, not to neighbours who needed his help, not to British officers who expected a different confession, not to old comrades who expected none. It is his thesis. He reduces the wreckage around him to a line, commits it to paper, and hides it under a brick. The mathematics of rubble begins with a sentence like that. Essen in June means brick dust suspended in humid air. Stuttgart slanted light broken by missing walls, church towers with teeth knocked out. The city's industrial heart was precise in its destruction. Records in the British Army's intelligence summaries counted and compared, blast patterns, factory footprints, the durability of Krupp's foundations under incendiary work. In Karl's block, the street sign hangs crooked from a twisted iron band. The house across from him is open like a doll's house, its rooms visible, its privacy amputated. Two women in aprons swing a sledgehammer against a half-standing wall. They are not named in any report. They will be called Trümmerfrauen in articles later. On this day their arms shake and they cuss, and they do not speak about politics. A man with a handcart collects bent nails from the rubble, the calculus of reuse. Missing family members are the currency of conversation. Haben Sie von Els gehört? Hat jemand Wilhelmine gesehen? Word aus dem Osten kommen. The public boards fill with lists of names and notations. Last seen on the road from Breslau, last letter February 1945, possibly in a camp. The British come in with loud engines and their own arithmetic. Curfew posted. 8 p.m. Non-fraternization orders. Coal requisitions. A civil affairs officer with a precise moustache writes in an occupation report that the Germans present as docile and fatigued, that stolen bicycles are everywhere, that there is the leveraging of politeness into access. No goose-stepping, a captain writes, almost joking, almost not. The British enlist German police to direct traffic around unexploded ordnance. They ask for a list of Nazi party members on the payroll. They expect records. The records are where the walls used to be. Hunger is the organizing principle of 1945 and 1946. It is not the hunger of rhetoric. It is caloric, calculable. The Allied Control Council calculates food shipments. The health authorities write down intake. It is in the occupation reports as daily rations in grams. A city's ration cards stipulate 1,200 calories in a good week, 800 in a bad week. Then the winter of 1946-47 brings a deeper ledger. Coal shipments freeze on sidings. Potatoes rot. The mathematics of a meal become bread measured in slices and numbers of children. Swedes and Swiss report in memoranda on the wasting of cheeks. German doctors report edema of the ankles. Cigarettes replace coin. American lucky strikes become denomination, backed by individual desire on every street. Pfund Flockies für ein Pfund Speck scrawled on a wall near the market. Markets that aren't markets rise at cross streets, at the zoo, at the edge of the station. Hamsterfahrten, hamster trips to the countryside, barter on bicycles, 2 pillowcases for a sack of flour, grandmother's brooch for fat. Police conduct raids and write up counts of confiscated butter. The elasticity of value is learned quickly. The arithmetic of survival is subtraction and small trades. Karl studies these numbers with his own pen. His wife is gone to air raid rubble in March, a wall unexpectedly mobile. His brother has not sent a letter since January 1945, last seen west of Königsberg. His son is alive. Small miracle. Frail. He has a job before he has a home worth the name. There are forms to be filled for ration cards. He is given a desk in a building without windows, near an office of the British Control Commission, because he can produce neat handwriting and can speak without shouting. The job title is provisional, Hilfskraft, auxiliary. Later it will be Sachbearbeiter. He knows where to affix stamps, and he already knows how to fold paper so it will survive a coat pocket. It is a skill he did not declare on any application. He sits among typewriters that tap like hesitant rain. The office assigns rooms. The mathematics of rooms will train him. There is a housing ordinance, squatting in a paragraph of a 10-page instruction sheet in late 1945. It gives the city the right to allocate living space based on available floor area and number of inhabitants. Bureaucracy as rationing. Karl becomes the arithmetic of scarcity. He keeps ledgers for 2 neighborhoods and then 4. He receives letters. Sehr geehrte Herren, always plural, as if there are more of him. They ask not for justice, but for centimeters and square meters. He walks with a clipboard into houses that survived. He counts rooms aloud, with a British sergeant behind him, and sometimes with a widow who has been counting all night. Dre. 4. And the attic? The attic holds 2 beds and a trunk. It becomes an apartment for expellees. The expellees arrive like weather. Trains pull into Essen and into every city in the British zone and the American zone. They are called Heimatvertriebene, displaced Germans from the east. Expulsions are not a rumor. They are a policy expressed in Potsdam language and in armed escorts. Silesia, East Prussia, Pomerania, Sudetenland. The trains carry heat and grief and lice. Women with headscarves, men with no teeth, children with hands that clutch luggage too hard for too long. The arithmetic is simple. 12 million. Some say 14. Records in Bundesarchiv binders put counted entries and estimated entries side by side. A memo from the city of Munster notes the arrival of 30,000 in a month. Another from Kassel sighs. Wohnraum äußerst knapp. Room extremely scarce. In Karl's office, the displaced stand in front of his desk. Their papers are thin and creased. He is to assign them to addresses where the citizens who lived there yesterday now must share. He sees the resentment in both directions. His ink will write it into a ledger. Local men from the fire brigades tell the new arrivals that they cannot just take. Expellee leaders pound their palms on counters and say that they have earned their soup with the loss of their towns. Jede Stadt hat ein Ostpreußen Mädchen will become a kind of rough proverb later. In 1945, a girl from Königsberg stares at a mirror that will not reflect things back to where they belong. On a Wednesday in October 1946, Karl writes 3 Personen, 20 mehr, Dutch Kammer, then adds, in parenthesis, Wasser an 10. Water downstairs. The arithmetic of scarcity is stability for some and insult for others. There are other camps nearby. Displaced persons camps that are not for expellees. They are for Jews who lived through what Karl writes and refuses to name. They are for Polish forced laborers, Ukrainian farm girls, turned welders, Italian soldiers turned prisoners and turned something else. In British reports, they are DPs. In German voices that speak lower near fences, they are Die Fremden. And in some mouths, older words are used that burn. Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Ferchenwald, Landsberg, Pocking. These are names and also addresses. Karl does not work in that sector. He rides a train to Hanover to search a hospital registry for his brother. The train slides past a fenced field. A sign in English he translates for himself. Displaced persons area. Thin young men play soccer with an urgency, not for sport, but for proving air in their lungs. A woman carries a pot. A boy sits on a crate and stares at the train. In his notebook later, Karl writes carefully, Einmal sah ich Lagerbewohner mit gelben Sternen, die keine waren, sondern Eigenstolze Zeichen. Once I saw camp dwellers with yellow stars, which were not imposed, but signs of self-pride. The line is as dangerous as the first line he wrote. He could not say it out loud without someone hearing more than he has said. The mathematics of denazification arrives as questionnaire forms printed in the American zone and adapted in the British. Fragebogen, 49 questions, sometimes more. Name, party membership, offices held, organizations joined, SA, SS, NS Frauenschaft, NS Lehrerbund, NS Volkswohlfahrt. Did you pay dues? Did you attend? Did you attend? Did you attend? Did you attend? Did you speak? Did you donate? The Sprüchkammer hearings will categorize Hauptschuldige, major offenders, belastet offenders, minder belastet, lesser offenders, Mittelhofer followers, Entlasteter, exonerated. The categories will be contested constantly, lifted and shifted, transformed by amnesty laws and practical need, and by the mathematics of memory. Karl fills in the form in April 1946. He has a party membership stamped 1937. He works in a municipal office in 1942. He did not join the SS, and he says this loudly in a quiet room. He did join the NSV because it was expected. He contributed to winter relief drives because it was conventional. He attended 2 meetings for the National Socialist Civil Servants League. He kept his head down and stamps up. He writes that his joining was evacuation of risk, not a leap of faith. Everyone says this. The Sprüchkammer hears it become chorus. Allied intelligence summaries report, with a patient kind of frustration, that almost every applicant says, Es ging nicht anders. There was no other way. In Karl's hearing, the panel reads from a file and from letters. These letters are called Perselschein, named actually by citizens, by humor that knows itself. Washing powder certificates. A post-war detergent habit applied to moral stains. From a woman whose husband he helped with food in 1943. From a teacher who says he allowed a Jewish student to retrieve a book without harassment. From a neighbor who says he never raised his arm when no one was watching. The panel nods. The arithmetic of guilt is not blind. It is just heavy. There are too many files. There are too few chairs. The system needs people who know how to run a city. A British officer writes in an occupation report that strictness is a virtue until it stops a water pipe from being repaired. By 1949, amnesties will wash more white. The percentages shift. In US zone numbers, millions of applications result in a tiny fraction classified as perpetrators. There are prisons, yes. Landsberg receives prisoners with names. There are quiet reappointments. The former Kreisleiter becomes a quietly paid pensioner. The teacher returns to his classroom in 1953. The arithmetic of guilt is turned into the arithmetic of governance. The ledger must be balanced to keep streets swept. On a morning in January 1947, a young policeman brings a file to Karl's desk. The man from the address on Bismarckstrasse will not accept expellees. He is a lawyer. He shows a certificate of exoneration, Entlasteter. He still says, nicht in mein Haus, not in my house. The policeman looks at Karl the way a field gunner looks at a map. The authority is a paper and a stamp, and a man who writes on a line. Karl writes. The expellees move in. The lawyer begins a letter of appeal. He will write 3 of them. The appeal will be filed and ignored. There is the arithmetic of letters. They always exceed the minutes available to read them. Outside, it remains cold. The British report, the ravening hunger of the cities, a phrase that will look good in a novel and worse in a statistic. The winter of 1946-47 is the benchmark against which later Germans will measure nothing, because nothing will be that cold again. In a notebook in the Bundesarchiv, in a file marked Ernährungslage Stadt Essen, a hand calculates caloric values from watery turnip soup and a half-molded loaf of bread. There are arrests in the black market for those who will not convert cigarettes, who have nothing left to exchange. The city conducts coal raids with shaky authority. An old poster from the war about Kollenklau, the coal thief, has a new life taped on walls by a different hand. The poor arrest the poorer for stealing heat, and write about it in polite sentences. A denazification officer in Dusseldorf writes in March 1947, "The mathematics of guilt will always conflict with the economics of reconstruction." He does not send the sentence up the chain. He writes it in his diary. Diaries will outlast the posters. In another file, a British civil servant writes that Germans have a knack for making normalcy out of devastation. Others call it resilience. Some call it denial. The words differ with the speaker's appetites and positions. There is contact and non-contact with victims. The DP camps maintain their own economy and own police. American military government orders advise Germans to keep distance from Jewish camps. A German woman carrying a basket of potatoes offers to trade with a Polish man leaning by the fence. The American guard laughs and shakes his head. In a municipal council meeting in fall 1947, a clerk states that Jews have been released from concentration camps and use more soap than is allotted. The sentence is written calmly, the old suspicion wearing a new coat. Meanwhile, a Jewish survivor addresses a room of Germans in a town hall near Frankfurt in 1948 and says into the microphone, "They say they didn't know. Who built the fences? Who brought the food?" There is silence. Germans shift in chairs. They think of themselves as victims of bombers and of the winter. Both are true. The sequence of grief is also a mathematics. When Germans say in unserem Namen, in our name, they speak centuries of political grammar and 2 years of personal avoidance. Under a flap of newspaper, on 6 October 1945, Karl has written, "Ich habe wenig gemacht, nicht. Currency reform happens like a door suddenly unlocked." 20. June 1948. Sunday. A date in a minute. People line up. They receive Deutsche Mark bills with unfamiliar gravity, crisp rectangles like a childhood promise. Erhard, the economist who will become minister and then something larger, announces the end of many price controls. A shop window that was empty the day before is full the day after. The famous photographs will encode a comedy of speed. Black markets wither. Cigarettes return to lips and fingers, and less often to ledgers. The arithmetic of a loaf changes overnight. Complaints follow as the poor see wealth stand upright in the street. Ration cards exist, but they no longer write the future. In the American zone, factories begin to hum, then to groan into life. Marshall Plan shipments arrive with stenciled letters, ERP, European Recovery Program, wheat in burlap sacks, machine tools, steel shapes. Reports from O.M. Gus write about self-help. Germans print brochures to say thank you. A photograph shows a line of workers unloading sacks under a cloudless sky. The sky isn't like that most days. Karl stays in his municipal office. Housing remains. Now the questions shift. How to build. How to demolish what cannot be saved. How to ration new windows. The rubble piles, already high, must be moved to a formal address. They will be stacked as hills in parks, grass planted on pain. Berlin will have a hill named for a devil, Teufelsberg, a listening station planted later on defeat. Essen will have more modest humps. Trümmerfrauen still swing their hammers in 1948, then less so, as cranes crouch on corners. Boys carry buckets of stone as school returns as something like normal. The mathematics of education includes a new set of books. The re-education program begins under Allied license. Religious education returns. Civic education is newly minted. In a 1950 schoolbook, Karl's son turns pages that speak of the Weimar Republic's failure, Hitler's early promises, and then quickly pivot to the suffering of war years, air raids, evacuations, refugees, food shortage. There is a leafless tree and a drawing and a child looking up. The page on Jews is a paragraph. The page on bombings is a chapter. Public commemorations choke on time. They begin. They stall. In 1952, a stone is set on the site of a destroyed synagogue with words about memory and reconstruction. A few citizens stand by, hands clasped. A year later, a plaque is unveiled for victims of air raids. A band plays a march. The band does not play at an Auschwitz commemoration because such a commemoration does not yet take place in this city. The mathematics of public memory is slow and squinting. Later, there will be a book called Die unbeaultigte Vergangenheit. Then there will be a phrase, Vergangenheitsbeältigung, mastery of the past, a verb that cannot cover what it promises. On a morning in 1951, the City Council meets to discuss Wiedereingliederung der 31er, those dismissed under denazification, now to be reintegrated under a law derived from Article 31 of the Basic Law. The minutes are cautious and crisp. The mathematics is of payroll and pensions. More files return to drawers. On a Thursday in 1954, an amnesty law removes legal liabilities for many lesser offenders. The arithmetic of guilt shifts again. Karl hears a neighbor grumble, Alles wieder beim Alten, everything as before. It is almost true, and also completely wrong. On a Friday in 1955, Adenauer announces the return of the last prisoners of war from the Soviet Union. Heimkehrer, homecomers. Men, thin and grey, stand at station platforms. Children look up. The mathematics of return moves the needle of pity and of anger in neighborhoods. A man whose job was taken by a younger man in 1949 now waits in a hallway with his demobilization papers. A letter is written to Karl's office asking whether returning men will be preferred in housing allocation. The answer is, where possible, which in his hand means rarely. Karl keeps writing. He writes in ledgers that are in archives now, and in notebooks that are under beds which will not be in archives. He writes in multiple scripts, official and private. The official voice records the arithmetic. 2 families moved to 7 Bergstraße. Complaints received, water and light installed. The private voice writes, in 1952, Demokratie ist hier zu kaufen mit Hochstellen. Democracy is purchased here with appeasement. He is not wrong. He is not completely right. It is a sentence of a functionary who has had to lie about disinterest. In 1957, the Bund der Vertriebenen is founded, an umbrella organization for the expelled. They hold rallies with maps of lost provinces and slogans that make neighbors uncomfortable. Schlesien bleibt unser. Silesia remains ours. The mathematics of longing is not reducible to square kilometers or calories. Political parties court the expellee vote. A man from Silesia sits in Karl's office and asks whether his map can be put up in the waiting room. He says it helps his people feel real. Karl nods and says no. He is polite. He is a clerk. He is also someone who sees what maps can do on walls. The Wirtschaftswunder happens like a film sped up. Volkswagen, Siemens, new apartment blocks, concrete poured as if it is a philosophy. Erhard's glasses reflecting numbers. Unemployment drops. Wohlstand für alle. Prosperity for all. Advertisements show smiling women in kitchens. There are new words. Nylons, Kühlschrank, Urlaub. There is a new smell of soap. The city prints brochures with a skyline before and after. The after has cranes and an attitude. The prayers of the poor are more specific now. A holiday, a set of cutlery. Karl buys a radio. He listens to football matches with his son. He does not cheer loudly. When the national team wins in 1954, the miracle of Bern, he says nothing in the first half. In the second half, he asks for the volume to be turned down. The mathematics of pride is travelled carefully. The past can hum under the crowd noise. The office calendar shows 1954. In the evening, he reads the names on files of men returned to work, with pasts included in the footnotes. He thinks of the British officer who wanted streets purified of enemies, and how those enemies became colleagues with pay grades. The camps are still in Germany, but different. Buchenwald is a memorial in the East, where it will be used to tell a story of anti-fascism and of capitalist guilt. Bergen-Belsen becomes a site of pilgrimage, gradually with stones and flags, with a quiet that visitors will understand and citizens will avoid. The arithmetic of memory is unequal across borders. In the East, they teach anti-fascism. In the West, the civics of forgetfulness with exceptions. In 1958, the Einsatzgruppen trial pulls names into newspapers. The past snaps its fingers and the present looks up. Karl reads the articles with the severity of a man who has been holding a weight and does not know how to put it down. The defendants speak in a vocabulary of duty. Befehle ist Befehl. A command is a command. Old words. A judge says, not this time. In 1963, the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials begin, with a prosecutor named Fritz Bauer, who will lose sleep for years. Testimony is given. Stenographers tap like rain. The dimensions of the crimes enter living rooms through newspapers and radio. Students will later pick up stones and slogans in 1968, but in 1964 factory lunches have a quiet. In a canteen, Karl hears a man say, "Das war nicht wir." That was not us. The sentence is both true and false. The mathematics of complicity is not solved by a single line. The files keep being written. An occupation-era report from 1948, annotated by a German archivist in 1972, mentions that the rate of repatriation of forced laborers was higher than the reintegration of German victims into civic conversations. A teacher gives a lesson on the Weimar Constitution and speaks of civic responsibility without naming neighbors who were once arrested for listening to jazz. The police find an unexploded bomb from 1943 in a canal in 1961. The street is evacuated. The past, once again, is removed by men in overalls and heavy gloves. There is a photo in the local paper, a bomb rectangle like a tooth. The caption is jaunty. The citizens smile, practiced. By then, Karl has moved up one rung. Referent. He signs forms in a rounder hand, a trace of authority. He has two new obligations, to allocate housing and to sign letters of recommendation for those applying for public positions. He reads denazification files that are now just placeholders, scanned by eyes 1,000 times. He sees Mitläufer in line after line. He wonders what would have been written in a perfectly just ledger. He suspects he would not have a job in a perfectly just ledger. He writes anyway. His son is in school. The son brings home a textbook in 1962 with a section on concentration camps that is more precise than the 1950 edition. A paragraph refers to Jews, Roma, homosexuals, political prisoners. A photo shows a gate without reconstructing the entire apparatus. Another photo shows ruins. The teacher asks the class to write about their grandparents' experiences in the war. They write about bombs and hunger. One boy writes about an uncle who did not come back. One writes about a shop his father had to abandon in 1938. The essay is kept small. The boy is told to write about the currency reform next week. The mathematics of the Cold War supplies a new balancing act. Stability now is measured against the red line drawn to the east. The Federal Republic is now an ally. The men who write occupation reports now write NATO notes. The calculus of rehabilitation becomes a calculus of usefulness. Police officers who had been suspended return to instruct new recruits. Judges who acquitted to survive now acquit again for different reasons. The state needs a bureaucracy that can operate between memory and urgency. This is not entirely cynical. The new basic law really is new. Elections change governments. There is a constitutional court. Protests do not lead to prisons as often. The mathematics of a free state allows for sadness and selective memory to coexist. In a basement of the city hall, there are shelves with binders. Bundesarchiv copies later. Wohnraumbewirtschaftung 1945-1955. Housing management. The files smell like cardboard under rain. In those files are names and addresses of expellee families. In an oral history collection, in Stuttgart years later, a woman remembers being placed in an attic in Essen. She remembers the clerk at the office who pronounced her name correctly. She remembers the neighbor who brought soup grudgingly and then with gratitude. The mathematics of grudgingness transitions into friendship when children are present. In 1967, Karl writes in his notebook about the execution of justice and the execution of stability. Die Zeit lässt uns schuldig sein und gesund werden zugleich. Time lets us be guilty and get healthy at the same time. It is a sentence he cannot say at a podium. He is not invited to podiums. He is a clerk who writes sentences to baffle himself and to leave something behind that is not a file. He keeps a letter. It is from 1946. A woman named Elsa A. from Königsberg wrote to thank him for a room with a window and to say that she hopes he will forgive her if she becomes rude when there is not enough bread. He reads it again in 1970 and writes under it, Ich habe ihr nie Brot gegeben, nur Raum. I never gave her bread, only space. It is a small sentence, mathematically precise. He adds, Der Raum war für zwei Familien. The space was for two families, he always adds. His notebook is an adding machine. When people talk about the Wirtschaftswunder years, they draw lines going up. There is pride in the slope. In the Ruhr, a boy who once counted crumbs becomes a master machinist with perfect fingernails on Sunday. In the Rhineland, a woman who was once a brick carrier becomes a department manager. There is a Volkswagen in the driveway like a polka dot on a dress. Credit becomes a word spoken without shame. The moral economy of scarcity shifts to the moral economy of contentment, and then of anxiety. Who still needs to talk about what is in the lungs, dust that never leaves. People cough and change the subject. In 1968, students march and accuse their parents of everything. In Frankfurt, a student shouts into a microphone that the judges on the bench tried enemies of the people once and will try students now. A judge nods. He was never a Nazi, he says. He was just a judge. His sentence is a cousin to all the sentences in the Spruchkammer hearings. The mathematics of guilt is taught on the street with chalk and posters. It is taught in apartments with coffee and arguments. Karl listens on the radio and recognizes an energy that his generation does not have. He does not begrudge it. He writes, Wenn man zu spät die Wahrheit entdeckt, wird sie noch wahr sein. If one discovers the truth too late, will it still be true? He is less precise now. He doubts his arithmetic. Some of the victims visit schools with numbers tattooed on forearms. Boys who have never been hungry look at the numbers like they are codes. A teacher weeps in a hallway after a talk. She says she didn't know. She is 28. It is plausible. It is also a learned pose. The mathematics of knowing and not wanting to know is complicated by age. Karl's work bleeds into the years. He retires. The files do not retire. A young woman in the housing office in 1975 holds a file that Karl wrote and shakes her head at his bluntness. She writes differently. The city debates whether to name a street after an anti-fascist who died in a camp. It decides to name a sports field after a mayor who negotiated a good deal with a steel company. The Bundesarchiv receives a deposit of municipal files. There are indexes. An archivist reads his looping hand and writes in a finding aid, neat, almost apologetic. She does not know his notebooks in a box in a closet. She notes a pattern in the files. Expellees placed quickly, denazified under categories, ver and v given preference in public housing. Political considerations always present, rarely explicit. Karl follows the news of trials in the 1970s of war criminals, often officemen who signed papers like he did, but for trains to move in different directions. In the evening, he watches a television program where a former deportation clerk says he is tired of the past. Karl turns the radio off halfway through the sentence. He writes, Müdigkeit ist der Stoff, aus dem Verdrängung ist. Tiredness is the stuff repression is made of. He wonders if he judges too harshly. He thinks of the women with hammers, and the expellees with trunks, and the boys in DP camps with soccer balls. They guarded like life. He attends a memorial in 1979. It is at the site of a synagogue. The speeches are improved. The pastor talks of guilt without draping it in his robe. The mayor reads a list of names. A woman reads a poem. He does not stay for coffee. He walks home and writes, Es dauerte nicht 30 Jahre, vor Menschen zurückzuschauen. Es dauerte 30 Jahre, vor uns selber still zu schauen. It did not take 30 years to look back in front of other people. It took 30 years to be quiet in front of ourselves. The mathematics of a life that did not hold a rifle long, that did not belong to a political group with a uniform, is pedestrian and precise. It is measured in ledgers and allocations and 1,000 small decisions that built the floor on which the new state would stand. It is also measured in the weight of papers not written. He knows which names could have been reported in 1943. He knows when he leaned on non-knowledge like a cane. He knows what sentences he wrote in 1946 to protect men who did not deserve it. He writes a list of those sentences in his last notebook. He writes next to each, while. Because. He does not give reasons to the world. He gives reasons to himself. It is an accounting that no judge will see. His son asks him once in 1983 about the questionnaires. He asks what he answered to the line about party membership. Karl says, Ich schrieb die Wahrheit. I wrote the truth. It is not entirely true. It is not entirely false. He wrote the truth he could bear. His son accepts the answer because he wants to keep his father. The mathematics of family is not an arithmetic designed by the law. When he is older, he reads in a newspaper, in a section called History, an article about Die Stunde Null, 0 hour. He circles a sentence that irritates him. For most Germans, the first years after the war were a time of innocence and new beginning. He writes in the margin, Nicht unschuldig, nur leer, not innocent, just empty. He is protective of the word innocence. Innocence is for children and for certain animals. He does not award it to himself and refuses to award it to his neighbors, even the ones who brought soup when his wife died. In an archive in the 1990s, a scholar reads his files and sees the monotony of effort. The scholar writes a book about the rebuilding of urban space as the moral foundation of the Federal Republic. The scholar uses the word habituation. Karl never read that book. He would have laughed quietly and then nodded. He would have appreciated the attempt to find a pattern. He has an entry in a notebook in 1990. He quotes his own line from 1945. He then writes, Die Mauer fiel, und wir lernen wieder dieses Rechnen. The wall fell, and we learn again this arithmetic. He means the balance between justice and stability, now with the East. He watches the border guards appear on television to explain themselves. He folds the paper with the story about trials. He thinks of his own hearing so many decades before. The sentences sound familiar. Befehl, Frieden, Ordnung. Command, peace, order. The mathematics does not change. The numbers become more precise. The digital age will not change the analog of guilt. Near the end, he reads and writes less. He organizes his notebooks. He assigns each a number and a year. He writes, on the inside of the first cover, Die Front ging nicht durch den Graben, sondern durch die Schubladen. The front did not run through trenches but through drawers. It is a sentence he can speak now, but he writes it anyway because writing was always what he trusted. He adds to it in a second line, und durch Gedächtnis. It is more like an invoice. It clarifies what is owed and by whom. He thinks of the Trümmerfrauen with their hammers. He thinks of the